Good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you are. I'm Ben Stone, Director of Design and Creative Placemaking with the National Endowment for the Arts. Thank you so much for joining us today for our Citizens Institute on Rural Design 2023 and 2024 Local Design Workshop Showcase. Go ahead to the next slide. So for those of you who don't know, and I'm going to guess most of the folks who are here today do know a decent amount about the Citizens Institute. The program, which I'll refer to as CIRD, is a leadership initiative of the National Endowment for the Arts in partnership with the Housing Assistance Council and our design partners at TBD Studio. Focusing on communities with populations of 50,000 or less, CIRD's goal is to enhance the quality of life and economic vitality of rural America through planning, design, and creative placemaking. Next slide, please. The CIRD is intended to empower local citizens to capitalize on unique local and regional assets in order to guide the civic development and future design of their own communities. The workshops through which we achieve these goals focus on a number of different topics, and we're fortunate to have a number of design experts and community leaders on our webinar today. You'll hear from in just a bit. We're going to discuss 4 different themes and how they've shown up in their respective communities, including 2 that I was fortunate enough to visit earlier this year. You can go ahead to the last slide for me. We've worked in well over 100 communities in every corner of the country, from the northern tip of Maine to the West Coast to the Virgin Islands and everywhere in between. I'm sure many of you on today's call are quite familiar with CIRD, but if you're not and you are looking to engage with us more, I'll just give you 3 quick recommendations. 1, you can sign up for our newsletter at rural-design.org. You can scroll to the bottom of the page to do that. 2, you can apply for the next cohort and workshop series. Keep an eye out for an application in early spring of 2025. And then finally, I encourage you to explore our website, again, rural-design.org, to check out webinars, recordings of past webinars, and information about upcoming webinars, stories, and community resources that will hopefully be of use to all of you. And finally, just mention in terms of housekeeping, we'll try to leave a few minutes at the end for Q&A, but encourage you all to put questions in either the chat or the Q&A function, and we'll do our best to answer as we go along. So now to get us actually kicked off, I'll hand it over to Omar Hakim with TBD Studio. Omar.
There we go. Hey, everyone. Great to be on here with you and great to be able to share some of the work that we've been taking on with our community partners and design partners over the last about 15 months. I have a lot to share with you today, so I'm going to go relatively quickly just to kind of provide at this point an overview of some of the work that's happened, just to be able to kind of unpack what we've been up to. And then we're going to jump into a few quick conversations with some of our community partners and design partners to try to lift up and discuss a few themes that we've seen across all of the work. Okay, real fast. Here we go. Boswell, Indiana. We had the opportunity there to work on a green job training center and community hub. So community organization there, sorry for the background noise. Community organization there purchased a old school, and we worked on kind of an adaptive reuse process to make it part of Green Job Training Center, which is for wind turbines, and the other for community spaces like a maker space, food lab, and other spaces, as well as an outdoor cafe, indoor cafe, and kind of landscaped area. In Dublin, Texas, we worked on a park master plan and community event space. So this is a snippet of the Dublin, Texas park space. And as you can see, there's a pool in the foreground. There's a kind of underused metal building there, and then some open space behind it. And the question is, how do we integrate food, landscape, public spaces, pedestrian safety, all into a number of different factors. We did have a prairie dog at our meeting that time, and that was fun. We also did some work. And here you can see just a couple. This one is still in process. This was our last design workshop, but kind of trying to revegetate and create safe spaces by changing materials, spaces for art, color, fun, and also areas for stormwater to collect as it does flood in that area. In Thompson Falls, Montana, we had the opportunity to work on a park and recreation space master plan with Kananaskis Land Trust, the U.S. Forest Service, and Wet Technologies. They basically the gist of it was there's a U.S. Forest Service had an administrative site, and they wanted to transfer that to become a public use site because administrative sites are public land but not public use. And so there was a large and in-depth conversation about how to do that, what's the most appropriate way to do that, and what types of amenities for people and also for wildlife and other species should be had in that area. So here's some of our kind of engagement process at the local gymnasium, and then just a quick view of like some of the landscape design that happened along with the overall master planning process. Here we are in Sunnyside, Washington. You'll hear more from Kate and Sergio as we go into this one, but just very high level. We're working on a affordable housing project there with SMR Architects and Catholic Charities to kind of come up with a vision for this very large neighborhood plan that was going to be built in the next few years. In Two Harbors, Minnesota, this was a really fun one. We were working on the on the shore of Lake Superior. We're here on the Edna G. There's Jolene, and we're kind of coming up with a waterfront master plan. And we had the opportunity there to work with Leo E. Daly Architects. Some of our meetings, what some of that looked like, and then just a quick view of some of the proposed kind of modifications to the site, but we'll talk more about that shortly. In Grenada, Mississippi, you'll hear more about that today as well. We worked with the Friends of Chakshuma Swamp. You'll hear from Robin, Delta Design Build, and Native Habitats on that project. That was a really interesting one, exciting one. We were kind of split into two areas of scope. One was a pavilion in a beautiful swamp, and another part of that was kind of trying to come up with a new vision of a vision for an underutilized and deteriorating World War II era aircraft hangar. And then again, just like some of quick views of what that looked like. In Mount Sterling, Kentucky, we had the chance to work with the Gateway Arts Center and the University of Kentucky Landscape Architecture Department and Tetra Tech Engineering. We were working on a vision for an area adjacent to downtown that often floods. It has some pedestrian infrastructure, but not a ton of connectivity. And we were really trying to figure out what types of landscape elements could come in that would kind of support the resiliency of that space, as well as connect somewhat divided communities along that corridor. What some of that work looked like, meeting, discussing, talking, asking questions, and then of course, trying to come up with some type of a cohesive vision for that area. And that's another one that we're still developing right now. In Fort Washakie, Wyoming, on the Wind River Reservation, we've been working on a cultural hub, repository, and archive. You'll hear more from Joseph Kunkel about that today, but the gist of it is the Fort Washakie, the Eastern Shoshone people are looking to bring objects and artifacts and histories and stories and recorded items, recorded elements of their history back to Fort Washakie, and they need a place to house them. And so we've been working on a cultural center and hub to house them, as well as repository and archive that are up to the standards that they need to be able to hold these items safely and without deterioration. Some of our work there, and just a quick view of that. So we're going to jump in a couple minutes early with our first theme. And so Jolene and I are just going to have a little conversation about that and share some images and slides and thoughts. It's meant to be pretty informal, but the idea here is to kind of understand what happens to set the stage for this work. So how do we prepare ourselves? How do we jump into this in a thoughtful and kind of strategic way. And so Jolene in the Two Harbors, Minnesota community did a fantastic job. So we wanted to talk a little bit about that. Jolene, hi.
Hi.
Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name's Jolene Brink. I'm in Two Harbors, Minnesota right now. I'm a freelance writer, and I like to joke that I'm a mom who wants to build a park, but secretly that's my cover for trying to get a big project off the ground, which CIRD has been just incredibly helpful for, and we're so grateful for that support.
Great. Thanks, Jolene. So again, I wanted you to talk, I wanted you to kind of speak to our audience here and help us understand how and why you took the approach you did to set up the workshop. We did have a bit of a lead-in process for Two Harbors, just kind of what weather was offering us a little bit, but I know there was a lot of factors at play, and you did a lot of work up front, and I think that really influenced the workshop. I thought it was a very successful workshop, and a lot of great conversations were had. So tell us like how you did that and why you did that.
The property that we're seeing in this photo right now is part of a 20-acre parcel that the way that we approached this project very carefully was the fact that the city has never owned the property. It was coming into ownership. It's been owned by the DNR, railroad, various different parties. And so when we as community members with no direct affiliation with city council or a local nonprofit beyond just being interested as local holders saw that this property was coming into city ownership for the first time, we knew that we needed to be very, very respectful to all of the different stakeholders. I've also only been in this community for 5 years, and so I was coming in as an outsider very carefully. So when we think about preparation for this project, even before we submitted our CIRD application, I gathered together a group of individuals and we said, is this something that we want to do? And when there was a consensus across newcomers, oldcomers, people who had been kind of fighting to protect this space from excessive development for a long time, we went forward with putting together an application. But even then, before we submitted it, I went in front of our city council and I said, just so you know, there's this group, we're thinking about doing this. We want you to be involved, because I didn't want it to come back that this little rogue group of community members was trying to take on something that maybe city council or other leaders had different ownership with. So consensus building from the very beginning, to prove that we were here to work with whoever felt like they owned that piece of property, whether or not they actually did. I know in a lot of small towns, there's a lot of perceived ownership and then actual ownership. And we were walking that line. What Omar just brought up is a survey that we were able to conduct between our initial site visit and the actual workshop, which took place in June. And we did this for a couple different reasons. One is we wanted to continue to engage our city council. And so I went to our city administrator and said, we were accepted into this program. We have these designers coming. We want to give them information to help them understand the problem to be solved. We don't know the answer. We're bringing in these experts. How can you help me? And in having that conversation, she agreed to send out a paper copy of this survey in a utility bill, which was making it more accessible beyond just it living on the internet. And we had it online. We did some tabling. We did all, and we ended up getting 400 responses, which in a town with 3,000 people was exceptional. And we used that to then go back to the city council and say, just so you know, this project that you keep hearing about, this is what people are saying. And this survey has been brought up again and again and again as a way to reflect not what our group wanted, but what we saw the community as a whole wanting. And going back to just that theme of consensus too, it allowed me to step back from the project and be like, it's not about what I want, even though secretly I want a park for my kids. But this project isn't about me. It's about, the people who responded to this. So this survey was a really, really big tool that we were grateful to have. And then at the actual workshop here, you can see it was a little local downtown shop. We set the workshop up so that we had 3 meetings, and each was a specific stakeholder group that we identified that would allow Omar and his team to really kind of cater the conversation to that group. So we had business leaders, and then we had a group of community leaders, city, county, and then we had a really group of like really engaged citizens. So at each level, we could kind of speak their language. And my favorite moment, and Omar and I have talked about this a couple times, is that there was this moment where at one of these tables, there was a map of the waterfront. And after decades and decades and decades of this kind of just like attempts at plans and, um, not being quite sure what certain people in the city wanted, there was a group of city council members and leaders and the mayor all with their hands on one of those maps, touching and pointing and talking about this thing that like we as community members feel ownership of too. But it was so exciting to have Omar's team there to ask the hard questions that then I didn't have to ask about, like, what do you actually want in this space, or what do you want, or what do you see? And that was possible because we, over the year that we had worked with, had like slowly worked to build their trust so that they showed up. And I think, Omar, you can speak to the results that you saw, but it seemed like you took away a lot of good feedback from that group.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the fun moments was as we were sitting down at the table that Jolene mentioned, someone, we sat down, we start working, and then someone comes up at the end of the table, sets down a huge camera tripod and points like this big camera just a couple feet away from all of our heads. And I was like, sometimes somebody will film a workshop meeting with a cell phone or, a little camera, but this was a large camera. And I said, ask what's going on. And it was actually because a quorum had been met. It was a city council meeting. And that was really interesting because I think it is always a dance in these types of meetings to figure out, how many people do we invite, who's coming. But Jolene, I think you did a great job in preparing this, setting this up to have kind of intimate conversations, larger public conversations, and also conversations that were intimate but shared very widely as a broadcast and recorded city council meeting. So I thought you did a great job, kind of teeing all of that up. You mentioned the different types of groups that were at the table. I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about, in a little more detail, how you got them at the table, because my guess is that each one of those conversations had to be done a little bit differently.
Yeah. I'll preface this by saying I don't consider myself a community organizer. Right. My background is in tech and communications. And so I went into this completely blind. I had never presented at a city council meeting before. And so I was kind of learning inch by inch with a lot of kind of mentorship from other community members. And so the way that we got those 3 groups to the table, the city council, it was presenting to them, meeting with them. I reached out to the city administrator and had a lot of one-on-one meetings with them. I engaged the mayor and they got really excited about this project. And so they showed up, and having the city administrator and the city mayor in support helped me bring in some other folks. So kind of keeping that group feeling like we weren't doing things behind their back, right? Because we didn't want any surprises. And I learned a lot about, what does each council member, what are they looking for? How do we speak to them? But then there was the business leaders. I had a lot of one-on-one meetings. So there's a brewery in town. I sat down with the owner. I reached out and I said, hey, there's this waterfront project and it's interfacing with your backyard. And I want you to know that whatever plan we come up with, like there's going to be some connectivity. Can I explain what's going on? We sat down, we had a beer. They were like a little hesitant. And as soon as I explained what the process was, they were on board and they were at every meeting going forward. And that's true with a couple other business owners. And then I went to the Chamber of Commerce and I said, this is the project that's happening. This waterfront project has she understood it immediately, a direct economic development piece to it. And so she was willing to call a couple meetings with her members where I was able to present to all the business owners we had that meeting in May, and then I had a direct invitation to say, like, thank you for, the work that you do in our community. In June, you have an opportunity to speak directly to these designers. And it's not me, it's my input getting you to the table, and then you can speak to these designers, and that'll influence that. And then community members, we had regular monthly meetings where people showed up, and we're lucky to have a really feisty hometown newspaper, and they were really good about kind of keeping people in that way. So it was, again, I guess, like catering to what each group kind of needed and just making it up as I went along, and listening and taking lots of notes.
Yeah, it really was stepping into the room and kind of getting started. It just felt like it did. You got the sense that it felt like you had already been working on it, intensively for a year. And that transition is sometimes a little bit hard to navigate, how you kind of transition those preliminary conversations into, okay, we're going to start to make some decisions, but you guys handled it really well. I want to just talk a little bit about some of the design stuff, and Jolene, you just jump in as you'd like. Maybe kind of set the stage a little bit here in this image of kind of what's happening.
Sure. Yeah. So what we have in front of you is 40 acres of uh, waterfront that's on Lake Superior. You can see a working ore dock back in the corner. It's still a working harbor. We're really proud of that industry. This is actually the seat of, like, where some of the iron ore from northern Minnesota first shipped back in the 1800s. Like, there's a huge historical component. It was owned by the railroad. Everything you see for 80 years, 90 years. For 10 years, it was owned by the DNR. That's why the city has never owned it. And now the property is transferring. So you're looking at the remnants of an industrial brownfield, and with some little kind of trails that have just like popped up, but none of it, again, the ownership is kind of iffy, but that's also why we needed to have that consensus, because there's so many different people touching this piece of property.
Mm-hmm. So just a quick kind of view of some of the transformation that we proposed. Basically, as you can see, there's a lot of space for cars and trucks and vehicles in this view, and then people were feeling that that was too much. In many cases, that the signage and direction of, like, where are you entering, and once you step in, where should I go that I won't kind of be dodging a construction vehicle, or just someone trying to also find their way in their car to park, um, or a Harley who's like, I'm just going to drive down the waterfront, that too. Because why not? You can drive a Harley on a hiking trail, right? So so that kind of led us to try to kind of soften that edge, make these kind of trails more circuitous, tighter, and do a lot of vegetation and rehabilitation kind of work. We also proposed kind of, as Dan would call it, a Swiss Army knife type building, a kind of small community hub building that could be, with an open floor plan that could be used in many different ways. And part of this, we do love trees and plants and doing this type of restorative landscape design, but I will say a lot of it is really strategic, because if you look at where the funding is for lakefront restoration and economic development, a lot of it is tied to restoration efforts and ecosystem reconstruction and habitat loss and reconstruction. So even though, yes, it kind of works for what a lot of people were saying is trails, gathering space, it does kind of tie into where funding is, and obviously kind of some of the resiliency efforts that need to be furthered as we get a little bit further into our climate situation. Do you want to talk for a minute just about what we're looking at here, Jolene?
Sure. What you're looking at, again, that piece of cement that's sticking out in the water, that's an ore dock from the 1800s. It's not safe, and so safety was a big part of the conversation. You can't see it very well, but there's a lot of really unfortunate fencing along that area. And so we, when working with CIRD and To Be Done Studios, are like, we want access to that dock. We want to know what we can do with it, but also just, again, how do we make this a safe, accessible space for as many people as possible?
Great. And so how do we transform that? We tried to create more access to the water, support a kind of if you could, there's a stunning hiking trail along this edge. We basically took some of that landscape idea and tried to create an area here that mimicked that rocky lakefront shore and to support bay health and habitat, while also making sure that we had enough kind of space for as the large freighters come in, their thrusters swing around as the ships turn and put a lot of water on those beaches. So I just want to say again, like for people that are working and living in working waterfronts or kind of working landscapes, design doesn't have to be totally, these kind of restoration efforts and people-centered stuff can, I think, be done in concert with that. So we were kind of thinking about that as we were preparing here. And then there's this a coal rail. There's a rail system that would a large piece of machinery would run along here, and we tried to play with that and create spaces to get up and get a little bit higher vantage point. And that's what some of these kinds of fun, playful structures would be. So just how to take advantage of some of that industrial infrastructure and and make spaces for people, and again make sure that the working waterfront, which like Jolene said, many people are very proud of, can stay a working waterfront. So yeah, you want to add anything to that, Jolene?
I'd just like to add that by working with CIRD, it keyed up our local soil and water conservation district to receive a massive NOAA grant, which they're using for a 60% design for some shoreline erosion mitigation. That came through, and they used our CIRD work to pair with the application. And that we also benefited. The University of Minnesota received a bunch of funding through federal government filtered on down for essentially implementing the plan, right? So I had this plan, and going into the spring, City Council said, well, how are we going to pay for it? And so we said, okay, well, we have this design, let's find a way. And so the U of M had a program, and for the next year, we're working with someone who's helping us come up with a plan to pay, maintain, and just keep it doable. So CIRD was just so essential in kicking off all of that, and it's just laid the groundwork for some really, really, really huge work in our community. So again, I'm really grateful for all of your work and efforts.
Thanks, Jolene. Thank you for making it such a wonderful process. Next up, we're going to talk a little bit about engagement as an integral part of the design process. I know we have been talking about engagement, and we'll keep talking about engagement, but I think it's important to say that it's more than just, go have some conversations, listen, absorb it, let it soak in, and then just go do some design. For many designers, it's really like one part of this iterative process where it go round and round and try to further understand and further suss out what the right approach is. And so a lot of that happened in Sunnyside, Washington, and Kate is here to talk about that work a little bit. So Kate, do you want to, can I ask you a question? And then would you like to introduce yourself?
Well, I think, Omar, we're going to start with Sergio. He's on the call
Okay,
now
great,
with
great.
Catholic Charities.
Sergio, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm Sergio Garcia, housing developer with Catholic Charities Housing Services, Diocese of Yakima. It's a mouthful, but it's essentially to differentiate all of the branches of Catholic Charities across the nation. Our branch serves basically all of Central Washington in its entirety. We have over 28 properties in our portfolio, and which equates to roughly over 1,000 units. We have a focus of serving those in need within the community, which brings us to this property in Sunnyside. Sunnyside has found a lot of growth within the recent years, which has led to an extreme wait list on our end, and it's led to over a 40% increase in rent since 2019, and limited supply of single-family housing as well. I see, and we have the Sunnyside outlook slide first, but I just wanted to touch a little bit on Sunnyside as a community. It consists of over 17,000 people within its vicinities, of which 82% are Latino, and the median age is of a young, roughly 30 to 40 years of age range. So young families are the primary population. But since they are blue collar, they are limited in their opportunities and financial expenditures. And with the latest increase of rent, it's led to a lot of them searching outside of city limits to search for housing. As a result, yeah, I can touch on that one. Sorry, I'm just all over the place.
It's okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, so since it is a rural blue collar community, there's a strong sense of neighborhood and collaboration, and transparency is key within any communication that we've had with the community, not only on this project but also prior projects. So we took that approach when reaching out to them for this project. You go back to the project slide. And as a result of that collaboration, and we found that there was a huge need for both rental and ownership housing within the community. So we took an aggressive and ambitious plan of acquiring over 57 acres within the urban growth district in order to create roughly 200 to 250 single family homes and 300 to 350 units of multifamily housing. And we did this with the approach in mind of not having it be multifamily versus single family. And within the multifamily units, we approached CIRD initially because we had an issue of over value engineering our projects due to limited supply chain issues and issues in generally that come with developments, sometimes under a developer standpoint, and you just think about the numbers, not necessarily the people, which led to an issue within one of our properties in Royal City where we overvalue engineered the square footage within the rooms, and many of the residents currently have complained that they're not necessarily usable. They can't fit king size mattresses, which are necessary for their young families, on top of other issues within the design process. So we thought that it was a good time to just stop any future pre-development efforts and just take a step back and reach out to the community to see exactly what was essential to them and what sort of community they actually want to live in.
Thanks, Sergio.
Yeah, go ahead.
I wanted Kate to introduce herself, and I wanted to ask you guys a couple questions. So Kate, do you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Omar. Hello, everyone. I'm Kate Smith. I'm a principal with SMR Architects. SMR Architects is based in Seattle, Washington, but we work across the state, primarily focusing on affordable housing communities. Just really excited to have partnered with CCHS and the CIRD program.
Thanks, Kate. So I wanted to speak to you all specifically because, like Sergio kind of prefaced, there was a lot of moving parts for this project. There's a lot of people involved, and you had a big task ahead of you. There's multi-phased, multi-funding sources, and because these projects take so much time, in my experience, it's not something where you can just kind of capture the community engagement and kind of people's voices in one go. So I wonder, in this instance, and Kate, of course, if you have other examples, if you could talk about how you and Sergio have kind of run through that process in this project. Like, how does that engagement process inform the design, and then the design inform the engagement process, and then hopefully continue on?
Yeah, Thanks, Omar. It's definitely an iterative process, like you had mentioned, with Jolene and your projects at Two Harbors. Yeah, so we were selected to be the design team through a competitive process with CCHS. And at the same time, they found out that they were awarded this opportunity with CIRD. And so I think that that's not necessarily typical that you already have the architect on board when the CIRD program is initiated with the community. But we knew from the beginning that community engagement was a priority for this process. And it was really important to engage directly with the community. He needs the development that CCHS envisions, like Sergio said. Really allowing the community to gauge along the entire way creates opportunities and long-term stability for those communities. And we really appreciated this time we had to collaborate first with the CIRD team just to get prepared for this 3-day workshop, which, took several months for us to, collaborate together and get prepared and make sure we were asking the right questions for the community. So in some of these pictures are showing some of the things that we did. So the first day of the workshop, our team split up to conduct site visits throughout Sunnyside, some of them to some of the properties that Sergio and CCHS's team are currently building in the community. We also hosted many working sessions similar again to the Two Harbors with local employers and planning officials, service providers, public funders even, because funding is a huge part of this project. Each working session, we made sure to document all of the insight that people had. And the end of that first day, we opened so we're located at Inspired Development Services, and they provide support to local families throughout Sunnyside, and that was right in the heart of their business district. So we opened those doors to the community, and it was the first time for us to really encourage the community to share their ideas and help guide the future of this affordable housing project. As you saw in the initial slides, and this property in total is going to be 57 acres. At the time of the workshop, CCHS only had site control over about half of it, so the southern half of that. So our focus was on that. So we had some visual preference boards for the community that they can place stickers on what images they connected with the most. We have little puzzle pieces for the community to look at adjacencies throughout the development space. As Sergio mentioned, how do we integrate single family homes with small scale apartment buildings? And a big thing about this, it being 57 acres, I mean, we're creating an entire community within an existing community. So making sure we're providing supportive services in a community center and central parks. And there was even a really fun activity that the TBD studio came up with was for the residents to select their top 3 priorities to invest in using Monopoly money to what would resonate most for their community. So, all of the activities were really fun and engaging, but the best part was just sitting down and having a meal with the community members and listening to them was a really great opportunity. So we made sure everyone was fed well. But then, with all of this, information documented, you see there's tons of sticky notes. We have, these word charts here, just pulling out all of the reoccurring themes we were hearing. We then broke up just the design team, and we worked on 2 site planning options. And we really worked on identifying the preferences, the opportunities, and also the challenges that the community could have. And this kind of reminded us all back to studio days because we just brought out our trays and worked collaboratively. We kind of formed our own little design community, with the CIRD and TBD team from Washington, D.C., and then the SMR and Framework and AHBL team from Washington State. So that collaboration was really awesome, and we had some really great results. And then at the end of those 3 days, we again invited the community back. We ate together again as the team presented, what did we hear from you? And I think that's really important to present back what we heard so that they know that we're listening, and then also gives them opportunities to, either add things or correct some of their comments. And we also very thankfully had the opportunity to have Sandra Aguilar with CCHS. She was providing language translations during all of our community events, and that was extremely helpful. So again, making sure that you're catering to the community that you are working in. And then we basically opened the floor to the community and asked them to critique our designs. And so that was the end of our CIRD workshop, our 3 days in Sunnyside. But for a couple of weeks afterwards, the design team continued to collaborate. All of the feedback from the two options, because really CHS's goal was to have a single site plan that they can then go to further engage with officials at the city, county, and state level to really encourage investment into this community. And so once all the funding is secured, we'll be able to go confidently back to the Sunnyside community and continue this iterative design process. So what you see here on the screen on the left-hand side was the southern portion of the site that we came up with from the CIRD workshop. And then since then, CCHS has acquired site control of the northern portion. So on the right here, you'll see some more additional development and exploration that we're really looking forward to going back to the community and see what they think.
Thanks, Kate.
Yeah.
Sergio, do you want to add anything to that, or can I ask you guys a follow-up question?
Yeah, I think the takeaway from the community meetings has been as developers and architects, oftentimes, and we can silo ourselves within our own ideas, and it's important to be reachable and not just stand within our comfy towers overlooking the community. Instead, make sure that the appropriate leadership within the city, whether it be local service officials or city leadership, have your direct contact line. They are tough conversations, but it's better that they have them with you than within a public forum to where you're not invited.
Yeah, I mean, that's helpful to talk about, just to be able to like receive all the different types of input you're getting. And I just was going to ask as well, like in this kind of process, did anything surprise you, throw you for a loop, make things shift as you were kind of opening things up and asking questions?
I'll touch on a quick point and then I'll let Kate touch into the design aspect. So I deal more with the relationship side of these developments, and oftentimes you have at least one neighbor who's strongly NIMBY, and there was one who wasn't necessarily ecstatic about it, but I was surprised to see that overall the community was very welcoming to the change, and they were very supportive of the development just because we had included them within very early on conversations within the design of the property.
Great. Thanks, Sergio. Do you want to add anything, Kate?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was really great to inform the community about changes that are happening. And I think they really appreciated that. And because of the conversations we had, we found out about, other improvements that are happening in the community, and then finding out how we can then connect up. Because, we want to put everything into this project, but it can't support everything, right? And so seeing where else we can get resources from the community to help support not only this potential, 57 acre, how many individuals is that going to be? Making sure that there's enough infrastructure and space for this community to grow.
Great. Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Sergio. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Next up, we are going to be talking about design development and the fluidity and adaptation that needs to happen over these like long lead projects, since we're obviously still in the kind of pre-development phases. And when I thought about this theme, I immediately thought about the work that Robin and Emily are doing in Grenada, Mississippi, because that has been a project that has flexed and moved kind of like the path of the river that Robin loves so much. So Robin and Emily, can you introduce yourselves?
Yeah, I'm Robin Whitfield, and I am a visual artist. I'm a watercolor painter. And I've come to this project because I've basically spent the past 30 years spending time on the property and really falling in love with it as a painter, and then realizing what an amazing place it would be for our community because it is literally adjacent to our downtown, and no one really knows about it but me. And if they do, they think of it as an eyesore. So I've been developing. I then formed a nonprofit, and I have since been trying to find ways to connect people to it to get them there. And I'm realizing, we really need some structures. And then I approached my friend Emily, the architect, and I'm gonna let her introduce herself.
Thank you. I'm Emily Roush Elliott. I'm an architect and the co-founder of the Delta Design Build Workshop. We've been here in Greenwood, Mississippi, so about 45 minutes away from Robin in her hometown. I have a great team of about 8, and we've been doing what we call social impact design build work here for over a decade.
Yeah. Thanks to you both for being here. I have a couple questions for you. This, by the way, was one of probably my favorite moments up there with the prairie dog running around on our drawings in Dublin, Texas. But this was such a fun moment, and I think speaks to some of the playfulness and creativity that you bring, both you and Robin, you, Emily, and Robin, to your work. I think it's helpful maybe to share a short version of the work that you've set out to do, Robin, with friends, and kind of how that started. And then maybe we could follow on to kind of what's happening now. But it just really briefly let people know, like, where were you and what was happening when you started this work?
All right.
And whatever Robin says, it's going to be like half the story of how amazing she is.
Well, thank you. Well, I'm gonna try to do it very briefly because we know I'm a Mississippian and I can tell a long story. But yeah, so I like I'm saying, I just spend a lot of time on this piece of property, and when you love something, you want to share it. Well, I've actually struggled to want to share it, but I really do want to share it. So it actually came under threat. I came out one day and realized I built a relationship with the city. I want to reiterate kind of what I think I forget who was talking about and building relationships, but how important that work was. I'd already told the city what an amazing place there was and could I have trails. It was like way back in early mid 2000s. And so, up to maybe in 2016, the city decided to clear the property. They were going to timber harvest it. Let me put it that way. I thought of it as a clearing, but they just needed some money. And so that really put me into action. And I really pulled together some folks in the community, and we formed a nonprofit ultimately and ended up partnering with the city. We ended up having to purchase all the trees, and that's just a whole other story. But the point is, we really tried to work with everyone the whole time and build relationships, because I thought no matter what happens, we're all gonna have to work together on this to make it work, because I truly believe people need to be in nature, need to have access to nature. And here was the best spot right here in our downtown. And so as someone who spends a lot of time there, and I've been a teacher for a long time too, trying to have people just pay attention to the beauty of the world. Anyway, that's kind of my job, working in at-risk communities. So I kind of took what I learned there and tried to figure out ways to get people to this place it was called Dump Lake. It had a lot of different names, kind of an unused no man's land that the city had. And so we finally formed this nonprofit and really started cleaning it up and making it nice and beginning to have really awesome interpretive events there. Well, the weather, always comes in unexpectedly, or, we have a lot of sun, a lot of heat in Mississippi, a lot of humidity, and a lot of rain. And so we started realizing, wow, to really keep doing this work, to appeal to to schools, to groups that we want them to stay, not just visit for 30 minutes and leave. To really want to bond and connect to a place, you've got to have a place that people feel comfortable. And so it came to my attention just one day, and I really do think this is kind of like we're talking about slowing down. And it's almost as if the land spoke to me one day. I had no intention of building anything anytime soon, but I just had this almost voice said to me, "You need a pavilion." So, and because we had just had an event where like we worked so hard and it got rained. It didn't get rained out. We did it anyway, rain or shine. But it became very clear to me that we needed a sheltered space, and there are some other beautiful sheltered spaces around the state that I've become very aware of. And I didn't want just a normal sheltered space. I wanted a space that also amplified the area, that made you want to stay longer and made you truly feel more connected to that place, because the space was built in such a way that you could feel it. You felt comfortable and you could see it better. So, and this is where I came to Emily, and I'm like, "Oh, Emily, what do I hear? Can you help me?" And and Emily knows, she was thinking, I'm sure, "Oh, I know Robin, she's going to want something amazing, and that's expensive." And she didn't say any of this. She's like, "Oh, yeah, let's keep thinking about this." She said, "Oh, you need to apply to CIRD." And so I'd never heard of this particular program, but it was 1 week before it was due too. I had to scramble, but I ended up calling Omar, making sure, this was a project that they were interested in. And he encouraged me. So that's kind of how we are now here, trying to do this nonprofit work, and also trying to figure out how to begin our edge into our first construction work. And we also had hired a landscape architect, actually, as our first move. I skipped over that because I really didn't know. I really love to think about natural systems and how they function, and I didn't want to harm anything, and I only wanted to restore things. So I hired a landscape architect who works in ecological restoration, and he particularly loves bottomland hardwood forest, and so he really was passionate about this, and brought community engagement immediately to the project when we kind of made our programming, like what are we going to do here? This was like back in 2018. So we did have that. Had that to bring to the table for the CIRD workshop as well.
All right. If I could just, like, the image that I have in my head, Robin, when you're talking about that is, first you're sitting in a kayak in the swamp, and I'm sorry, I realize there aren't any photos of how beautiful this swamp is, but everyone has to close their eyes and imagine a beautiful cypress swamp with red needles and birds and all types of wildlife and plant species around. And Robin sitting in a swamp doing a stunning watercolor painting, and then shift. The next image that's in my mind is that you're mobilizing to kind of save this place, and then you shift again, and you are ramping up, creating this nonprofit, and really kind of activating the place and activating your community within it. And then you also take on another huge project, which is the hangar. And I know there's a lot to that, but I wonder if you could talk to, and I think, Emily, you also understand really deeply how long things take and how much care they take to kind of get right. But maybe if you could both talk to the need to be able to shift and go, you know what, something else is important to people, and we're going to adjust what we're doing to make sure we're accommodating that.
Yeah. So how the hangar got involved, y'all, I'll just quickly tell y'all, I guess almost when I'm in a space, the spaces almost speak to me. I mean, it's like kind of a poetic speaking, but I actually approached the city because I knew the back end of our hangar had kind of fallen down, and I'm a lover of wood and lumber. I love trees in every form, whether they're standing and alive or whether they're these beautiful, storied pieces laying on the ground in this old World War II hangar. And I went to check out the lumber to see if the city would give us some for said hangar for said pavilion that we wanted to build. And maybe I love to repurpose things, and just thought that might be a cool connection. Well, I stepped into the space and I was having to wait. The city manager was late. And so I spent some time there. And in that moment, I was wowed by the space itself. And I thought, wow, I mean, this is the most amazing building in our whole community. And does anybody know that? And what could we do here? This is big enough to have a major concert, an entire festival. I mean, with even half of it left. So I just something in me, the building almost said, "Hey, I want to be here." And so I just thought I started asking questions like, what could this be a community space that maybe wasn't like the old space, but maybe even stayed open like a pavilion. So I thought, well, that's interesting. Here's two pavilions that our community could have, and we actually have 0 gathering spaces in our city. So, and these aren't very far apart. They're just, as the crow flies, probably less than a mile apart. And I thought, maybe we could connect it with the idea of gathering and some materials. And this would be one for very large, gathering events, and the swamp for more intimate ones, but all connected to the culture and story and history of our community.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I would add,
go ahead, Emily.
I would add just to the question of sort of fluidity within that context is that I think of that is that I have to admit, we've been doing this a long time. And so sometimes I come to community engagement without the energy that I used to bring to it, right? And you have to admit, sometimes you're like, I've had this meeting before, right? And when I feel that way, I realize I'm doing it wrong, right? And so one of the questions that we really have been digging deeper on as an office when we are asked to do engagement is, who are we engaging with? And being really thoughtful about that, because it's kind of easy to say, well, these people are the experts. And then it becomes sort of a burden maybe on a neighborhood, or, it's just, as we all know, it has to be really carefully done. And so you've heard Robin talking. And so for one thing, to have Robin sort of come in, she's the built-in expert, right? A lot of this engagement work had already been done in this project, sort of the broad level. It wasn't about asking about coalescing a sort of whole community-wide group and asking what could be here, because that had happened and there was this beautiful vision already. And so we got to drill down. And so I felt like that was this wonderful first pivot to say, we're not casting as wide a net as we often have to. Mm-hmm. We're casting this narrower net. And so when we started asking who the community is, one of the things that came out that's really beautiful is that in the quest of Friends of Chakchuma that Robin founded and runs, what part of that is they're trying to introduce people to nature. And so we started talking about level of comfort in nature as sort of 3 different community types that we were engaging with. And so we asked people, like how we came up with the term snake curious, right? How snake curious are you? How nervous are you? Do you want an asphalt path? Do you want a dirt path? And so I feel like there were just all these beautiful moments in this project where there was a pivot, and the pivot was always an opportunity. So this hangar popped up. And again, I'll admit, after doing this for as long as we've done it, at first I was like, no, we should pick. We need to pick one project. We need to be realistic. We need to wrap our arms around it and our heads. And then really listening to Robin and the vision, we started understanding these flight paths as, as real things and as human experiences where, the birds and the planes and the pavilions, we're really all connected. And when we stopped and listened, that's what we heard. So I think the fluidity was just ingrained at every level, and a reflection of our wonderful client.
Yeah, absolutely. And I could say, although I am a little biased, but I can say that when we had conversations, which were not all easy in the design workshop, I really do think you all heard them, listened to them with open hearts and open minds. And I know that the work that you're taking on will continue to adapt and adjust and make sure that those voices are heard, which was challenging. I can say, just to jump in a little bit, some of the work that happened in it. This was a phasing diagram that Delta Design Build did. And maybe, Emily, if you could just talk a little bit about balancing, because we have this really fun idea of making this pavilion into this hangar into a space for gathering, concerts to help enliven and enrich the community there in Grenada. But at the same time, there's people that are like, absolutely not. It should be restored as a hangar. We need to park planes in there. And those concerts and airplanes, sometimes are connected, I guess, but they're somewhat divergent. Like the FAA is not all about having, parties in hangars usually. So came up with a concept that then again adapted.
Yes, yes. So we're the two faces you're seeing today, but Michelle Stottleman is also on my team and really gets a lot of credit for this. And then also, I think part of being adapted is also just being really open. And we said, we can do a lot, but there's a lot of local resources, right? It's so easy to look around and say there aren't, and that's almost never true. So Belinda Stewart Architects, which is just sort of down the road, the opposite direction from Grenada that we are, is in Eupora. And so Belinda was engaged with this part also. So Michelle and Belinda really put their heads together around this question and said, well, let's be really thoughtful about the existing conditions, the adjacencies, and then these sort of competing ideas of what could happen here in terms of really, I think, people feeling comfortable and sort of like the space is safe and secure. For some people welcoming, for other people maybe not as welcoming was the goal. And so what they did was they were very creative about this boundary line that you can see. It's the dark blue line that goes through each of these 6 images and how it jogs. And so they looked at it and said, well, what if this part could be secured and be public at this time, and then this could be public or semi-public only sometimes, and then maybe there's an area that never is semi-public because the FAA office is in there. So they were really thoughtful about that. I think Belinda is just such an inspiration and a veteran in this work who is not jaded and has not let the many years of doing this change the way she thinks. And so I feel like she also, you can see there are many different uses we talked about. We talked about museums, we talked about Airbnbs, concerts, just parking planes, plane refueling, all kinds of good ideas. And so we cast this really sort of creative eye to look, what are all the things that we think about that could happen? But then we also sort of said, okay, well, what can't happen? And so that also helped that line jog around and we could consider both at the same time.
Yeah. And what's the most frustrating part of this part, because I mean, just before I'm a big person. I believe in slow design. I believe in taking time and I just think some projects just to have their own timeline. This one doesn't, because its roof is so damaged that if something's not done to the roof by the city who owns it within the next year, none of this is possible. And so that makes that part of the project feel frustrating, but it's still, once again, part of its story. And we're still working on getting the city to be willing to invest in that.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. I'm just going to touch really briefly on this. Again, this is kind of keying back to the leaves and how do we do this? And one of the fun things, again, about this workshop was that Robin, as an artist, you were able to really kind of support our creative thinking and widen and broaden it, as well as Rob and Robert, the landscape architects who aren't here today. But yeah, we kind of came up with this space that was this kind of leaf that had playfulness, natural materials, openness to as open as possible and as kind of enclosed as appropriate to make sure that you had the spaces that you need to teach and to share this beautiful swamp. Some the kind of timber overhead structures, and then that was meant to kind of spill down onto the water's edge alongside one of the more beautiful vistas of the swamp. So that's where we've left off, and hopefully this project will keep moving forward as I think it will.
I wonder if we have time, I would just love to prompt Robin to share just a little bit about how maybe, I think there's a big picture question we might not have time for, but about sort of your own personal evolution, but also just how CIRD has, but very directly how CIRD has been a jumping off point to additional funding.
Sure.
Oh yeah, well, gosh, without CIRD, I don't think we could have really spent the time and collected all these various ideas and pulled it together. But in doing so, we did spend the time, and we did. CIRD took me we got to go to Washington to the HACC conference where I got to meet so many people, and in doing so, I was able to actually meet someone that would eventually end up becoming. I think CIRD also maybe helped create this relationship between us, so that we do have. We created So they are going to be funding the design, the actual drawings, the construction drawings for the pavilion. We have that money already in hand. So that was really amazing.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, it's always a pleasure to talk with you both, and thanks for sharing.
Thanks for having me. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Next up, our last theme, we're going to talk a little bit about financing for the future and how that design development can turn dreams into reality. And so this isn't just about how to raise money, but it is also about how that is thought of in the design process. Because the idea is usually we don't just say, okay, here you go, figure it out. I think some of the best designers that we work with are already thinking about that way upstream so that those processes can be as successful as possible. So Liz Kinney, who was working with the Eastern Shoshone tribe, could not be here today. So I'm just going to tee up a quick video for her, Caitlin is, and then so we'll watch that, and then we'll switch back to Joseph, who's going to share about some of the work that we've been working on in Fort Washakie.
Sorry, Omar, it's just taking me a moment. I'll be right with you guys.
You know what? I think I got it, Caitlin. Let me see if this works. Did everyone hear that? Okay. Let me try this again, make sure. Can everyone hear the audio on the video? No. Okay. Give us 1 second then. Let me try it this way. Did you guys hear the video that time? No, fantastic.
Oh, Omar, when you go in and share your screen, there's a little checkbox that says share your audio.
Okay. Thanks, Hillary. So do that, share sound. Okay. That's great to know. There we go. Sorry, everyone.
Hi, my name is Liz Kinney.
If I can't get this in a second, that did work?
Yeah, you got it.
Okay, great.
Hi, my name is Liz Kinney. Thanks so much for inviting me to speak today on behalf of the Eastern Shoshone Tribe, located in Fort Washakie, Wyoming, on the Wind River Indian Reservation. The Eastern Shoshone Tribe has had a long-standing vision since the late 1950s to have a safe and secure place to properly store and preserve their many important cultural artifacts. And there's been a lot of ups and downs towards the momentum in realizing that vision until we partnered with the Citizens Institute on Rural Design and National Endowment for the Arts a year ago. I began working with the Cultural Center and Archives staff a couple of years ago to co-develop award-winning applications to the National Endowment for the Humanities and Council on Library Information Resources. It was through this process that we realized we needed to take a much more comprehensive approach towards addressing the tribe's many preservation needs. And that's when we decided we need to not only plan for a space for the Cultural Center and the archive, but we need to also include the Enrollment Office and the Tribal Historic Preservation Office and a museum that could be accessed by the public. CIRD's involvement in this project has been transformative. They brought together a team of architects, designers, funders, and preservation experts, which is exactly what we needed at this stage in the project. Their deep engagement in the community through several site visits and workshops really gave the community a voice and gave us a platform to be able to come together and really envision this project in a more cohesive manner. And now we finally have a concept for our cultural hub. And right at the time that we were finishing up our CIRD project, we got an email from the Mellon Foundation, which was very surprising and unexpected. And they came out and visited us and shared more about their Humanities in Place program and expressed an interest in partnering with us. This was very surprising because to receive an email from such an esteemed foundation, given that we're such a small organization, it was pretty exciting. And since then, we submitted a grant application for $500,000, which is still pending. But should this be awarded, it'll give us the resources that we need at this point in time to catalyze our project. Together, we're building more than just a building. We're preserving the past and planning for the future in a way that really honors the rich traditions of the Eastern Shoshone Tribe. And none of this work would have been possible without the support of the Citizens Institute on Rural Design and National Endowment for the Arts. So thank you.
Great. Well, I don't think she can hear us, but thanks, Liz. Let me switch back to the presentation and we'll keep going. So while I'm doing that, Joseph, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so good afternoon, all. I'm Joseph Kunkel, citizen of the Northern Cheyenne Nation, principal at Mass Design Group. I lead our Oge office or our Santa Fe office based in here in Oge in the Southwest. And I was really fortunate enough to kind of team up with Omar and Citizens Institute on Rural Design to really kind of help and support what this kind of part of it is turning dreams into reality. And I think Omar kind of keyed it up around is more than just kind of focusing on the kind of financial aspects. And I think what we were really critical around organizing is really trying to support and tie together the kind of vision he has, putting that vision into words. And so when we kind of think about capital projects and we think about measurable impacts, we're really trying to kind of understand what are those measurable impacts that we can see within the community. How is this capital project, how is this piece of infrastructure going to have an end result, a positive end result to the community? And so we developed a series of tools, and so the next on I think the next slide, that we to kind of engage the community to lift up their voices. And so oftentimes I speak around, I talk about the community as creating the vision, or they're the architects of their own vision, and that vision is a long-term commitment to change. And so we developed these series of exercises to really lift up and understand ways in which we could be tying the design to that vision and helping the community or supporting the community create a narrative that reflects who they are as a peoples. And so that kind of first exercise, what we call the kind of impact design methodology or IDM, this is really around creating a narrative. What is the mission? What is the vision? How do we kind of move from concept to design? How does that then design creating some systems changes within the community? And then kind of from a kind of architectural standpoint, we need to tie that vision and that mission to a site and program. And we went through a series of programmatic exercises. And then also lifting up design themes, ways in which kind of how is the architecture starting to resonate with the community. And so on the next slide, we just really pulled all that information together, right? We broke up into individual groups based over 2 days, and just tried to tie language together. And oftentimes, and as architects, as designers, we tend to at times become a little bit, the language is a little bit inaccessible. And so we really wanted to get away from the jargon and really develop that North Star, or that mission. And then the method, how do we get there, around really creating that impact? So I'm going to kind of dive in a little bit and really quickly through the kind of impact design methodology and really clarify or try and communicate what is the end goal of this specific project? What is the project trying to achieve? And so through engaging with the community, we created a shared narrative around the mission, preserve, share, and pass on the language, cultural, ancestral knowledge, and the tribal history of the Eastern Shoshone tribe through community gatherings, storytelling, tribal sovereignty, and to impact the public understanding, around economic development and cultural tourism. And so if we're successful, or when the tribe is successful, this building or this piece of infrastructure will achieve this, right? And so next slide talks a little bit about how will we get there? What are the kind of key design opportunities that we can kind of translate into design? And this is really the kind of, I would say, the kind of architecture. And so preservation, connectedness, and continuance, create archives, research, and teaching spaces that allow culture to be orally, visually, and physically communicated. Create spaces for community to connect to each other, the cultural objects, their stories, and their land. That connectedness becomes really important, and the building and the piece of what we would think of as a large piece of infrastructure really needs to do that. Continuance, bridging Eastern Shoshone histories and past life ways to current identity with future generations while educating guests who visit. And so this is going to do something twofold, right? It needs to be a building, a piece of infrastructure specifically for the community, but it also needs to be a place where outsiders coming from off the reservation can kind of understand who are the Eastern Shoshone and why are these histories important to lift up. And then if we're able to kind of communicate and implement all those methods, what will the impacts be? And these are some key measurable metrics, right? These are things that we can kind of say will happen if we're able to do the things on the last slide, right? Improve connectedness and fluency within the community of the Eastern Shoshone, culture, tradition, language, increase the revenue and money that stays within the community, right? Turning those dollars over multiple times within the community. Ancestral and symbolic connection to the land, connection to the kind of surrounding areas, become and are made visible through this piece of infrastructure. Increased participation in cultural gatherings, and classes focused on traditional arts, crafts, and indigeneity around food gathering. That's important because, I mean, throughout Indian country or through many of our tribal communities, we see our tribal populations leaving. And so we want to bring that connectedness back to the community. And then lastly, ability to research genealogical history and cultural artifacts in the spaces that honor, preserve, and preserve the Eastern Shoshone culture and history. And then lastly, if we're able to kind of see those impacts, hopefully we see some systems change or some systemic change, right? How do we know that this project will have impact outside of itself, right? It provides a space for generational healing, equitable access to cultural knowledge, connection to the land, and establishes tribal sovereignty over historical narratives for the youth and members of the Eastern Shoshone. And this is really, I think, important because this is more than just a building. And so this is kind of getting outside of design, but how can we really start to think about the generational impacts that we'll hopefully have through this piece of infrastructure? And I think kind of lifting up that narrative and being able to put that into words becomes critical. Okay, so the next slide, we kind of get into the kind of form. So that the previous slides kind of speak to the narrative. Now we have to turn that into a concept, form, function, and fabrication. So really, we came up with two different concepts and then kind of brought them together. That kind of this building as connector. How are we connecting the building to the land? and creating the forms that allow us to understand the connection to the river, the connection to the kind of physical land and the mountains. On the next concept, we talk about building as medicine, and this is where we started to kind of peel apart or try and understand the rose petal, or the kind of agricultural connection to the physical space and how it ripples out. And so the form, function, and fabrication really talks about that kind of essence of creating that center space while also kind of rippling out towards the community. And so this building becomes a place for healing, a place for kind of long-term generational change. And so the next slide really kind of starts to put that into some form in some ways. These were just some kind of initial kind of massing diagrams that speak to honoring the cardinal directions, honoring the place, and really trying to kind of think about the building outside of itself. And you can kind of start to see how those kind of rose petals start to ripple outside of itself, and really create a center space within the community. And this is just a kind of essential or kind of initial massing itself. And so some interior renderings, creating a center space that really speaks to and thinking about material, thinking about the form, thinking about the connection to the landscape. And you can kind of see how that plays out in some of these kind of initial concept renderings.
Joseph, this is so helpful, and you guys really are incredibly thoughtful about the process you laid out. But I just want to, just so that everyone's kind of understanding what you're saying, why is that so important to taking the next steps? I think everyone understands, like, coming up with a concept. Well, one, it is hard, and I don't want to shortcut or like kind of decrease the importance of the concept, because we did as a team work very, very, very hard on this concept. But I think there was as much work on that kind of front end. But with your experience, having done so many types of projects like this that are really challenging and have kind of an uphill climb, why is that initial process so important that you laid out?
Well, this is a lot of our work with tribal communities. It is creating that kind of sense of ownership that the community, as I kind of was alluding to, is playing a key role in establishing that vision and connecting that vision to a narrative that kind of speaks to the concept, right? Oftentimes, when we kind of engage, we tend to engage upstream before an RFP or an RFQ or a request for proposal or request for qualifications put out there. The design process very much kind of, I think this is the start of the design process. And I think what is really exciting about the work that Fort Washakie is doing is that engaging with designers, with architects, with the National Endowments for the Arts, really gets the ball rolling to understand how we can put the words into form, and then using and leveraging this material to go and advocate for additional funding from the Mellon Foundation, from private donations, or maybe there's the opportunity to take on some debt financing, proving to a bank or an institution that there is a key concept or a critical idea here that is worth funding and financing. And so that those initial meetings really kind of establish an anchor there.
Thank you. Thanks, Joseph. You shared a lot, and that was an incredibly thorough process. So I really appreciate you kind of letting everyone into how you all work. So that's it for the webinar kind of presentations. And I think we have a couple minutes here for some kind of next steps. What else is happening at CIRD, and if people want to hang out some time for questions and answers. So thanks, everyone. Hillary, do you want to talk about the RFA at all?
Yeah, well, first, Caitlin, I think there was a question in the Q&A before I jump in.
Yeah, I just it the question was from I'm gonna mispronounce the name, Aloysius Amen, regarding the Grenada project. The question was, this is fantastic work you're doing. How does this work link to town, city development in such a way that strengthens the rural urban linkages?
Um, that's a great question. I think that so much of what we're doing is just deeply rural. So I'm quick to say I'm not an expert on rural urban linkages, but at the same time, what does it mean to be rural? And so, we have a lot of these towns that are walkable. There are a lot of small communities that have most of the things that we need. And so I think one of the things that I love about Robin and the way that they're working is that they're saying, like, why can't we have that? Where, the city of Memphis develops this big, beautiful public park, and there's not ever sort of a moment of pause that says, or maybe there is, maybe I'm assuming, but at that scale, there's an assumption that public parks are a necessity, but in small towns they're not. And so I think that's something that these natural amenities in rural areas are something that we're striving to not let be overlooked. And then also adding onto that and saying, like, well, what if it is walkable? And so that's something we've talked about a lot with the swamp, with Choctuma Swamp being quite close to downtown Grenada, but there's some encouragement, some signage, a little bit of improvement to walking paths is needed, not a lot, but filling those gaps in walkability linkages is another way that I think that rural projects can seem more urban, but ideally that's just better design, right?
Yeah.
Great, thank you, Emily. Really appreciate that. We also have a question from Sarah Marshall regarding cohort members. How do cohort members receive final deliverables, and what sort of project management software does CIRD use? I think we just use me. No, and Hillary, no.
I could talk about deliverables a little bit. The cohort is a little bit different than the workshop. So just to make that distinction, with the workshop communities, 8 of the over 25 communities in total that were selected will kind of do these deep dive workshops. And so part of the images that you saw were packaged up into a large design book, and those are transmitted to the workshop communities, and then of course any of the other design assets they need, or 3D models or whatever from kind of the architectural end, we can share all of that. When it comes to the cohort, the communities that weren't kind of getting the deep dive design workshop, we often have kind of one-on-one sessions with them. And one of the tools we use there a lot is Miro, M-I-R-O. It's basically a virtual whiteboard. And we use that to kind of put things on, have discussions, but it is a nice visual kind of gathering place, one for community engagement, but also kind of a storage area of images, discussions, post-it notes, different kinds of things. So that's one of the tools we use. Beyond that, it's the typical stuff like Google Drive, Dropbox, things like that, where you can save information and collaborate on documents and spreadsheets. Caitlin and Hillary track all of the progress with each one of the community's cohort or webinar or workshop with different types of tools like that, and using the Google Suite and just like good old email. So hope that answers your question.
Jolene, and then I have a question from the Q&A. Go ahead, Jolene.
Oh, for project management too, Airtable is a great tool for tracking people and information in really simple forms. I'd really, really recommend that. And we also used Miro, and it's a fabulous, free, great program that I would recommend to anyone as well.
Thanks, Jolene.
Thank you. So we have a question from Ethan Malad. Curious if or how regional planning agencies have been involved in CIRD cohorts or workshops in the past.
That's a good question. As you've seen, some of these workshop communities, I can answer some of this, but maybe also Courtney, if you want to jump in on any of this. So we have worked on some more kind of regional focused projects. And really, it's kind of whoever wants to be involved can be involved over the course of these kind of 18-month long projects. We're usually working with city governments or town governments. But I would be excited and interested in working with more regional planning authorities. We do have somewhat of a kind of spatial requirement, so we're trying to figure out how we can improve rural communities in the kind of spatial built environment, public space world. If it's more systems based, that may or may not be kind of within the CIRD program purview. But Courtney, do you have any other experiences working with regional planning authorities?
With CIRD, not specifically, the program in its early days actually was regionally, and so we would do workshops that covered multiple counties, things like that. We moved away from that a while ago, and I think there's an interesting potential. We did do a workshop in or not a workshop, we had a cohort community, the Shenandoah Valley, or Shenandoah County, but it included multiple municipalities within the county. So again, not quite a regional scale, but certainly larger than just one community. And I think the nature of the project is then impacted by that. So you have to make sure you can address the needs of multiple municipalities and groups and that. But I think certainly we'd be open to hearing more about a project idea around that.
I would say in Thompson Falls, beyond regional, we were working with the federal government, and that was an interesting experience. It was a fantastic experience, really, but they were thinking about public space and public land from the federal level and the federal perspective. And so that was as we were kind of butting up against local interests, which makes sense because the people that live there next to that piece of land and around that piece of land do feel a lot of ownership of it. And it is a place that they've protected and supported and helped kind of manage over the decades. But also the federal government was kind of like, this is federal government, public land, public space. So how do we navigate those conversations? So it really was an interesting topic, and one level above regional, but good conversation to have. And some of the outcomes there were more about land use policies than kind of specific landscape design or built environment kind of changes. So. Any other questions? Great. Hillary, would you like to talk about the RFA at all, or do you want me to touch on that?
Sure, I can jump in real quick. A few of the things I was going to point out have already been covered, which is fantastic. So I will just touch on some points that weren't yet brought up, and then we can wrap up the virtual event. So we have an RFA that goes live in early spring of 2025. And for you to be able to know and be one of the first people to find out about it, you sign up for our CIRD newsletter, which I did share in the chat already. And with the RFA, just for clarification purposes, when you apply, you can apply for either the local design workshop and the design learning cohort. There's not two separate applications for it. Sometimes people do ask that question when this application does go live. A really cool perk that is going to be happening this next program cycle is that we are going to be meeting in person right at the start of this program cycle for 2025 and 2026. So our workshop and cohort communities can get to know each other right off the bat. And as Omar explained earlier, there is a difference between design learning cohort and a local design workshop. So I won't get more into the weeds with that. Omar did an awesome job sharing that. And for this program cycle, we are going to have a total of 25 communities, or 25 slots for 25 communities, 6 of them being for the workshop and 19 communities for the cohort. And to learn how to apply, Again, I shared the link earlier in the chat. There is a how to apply page, which I highly recommend checking out. And finally, if you have any questions between now and the RFA, I just shared in the chat right now our email address. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We're here to help you along the way to learn more about our program, as well as assistance with the RFA and even some of your own design challenges that you'd like assistance with. We'd love to help.
Thank you, Hillary. I just want to wrap us up. And Omar, if you have anything else to add, certainly jump in. But just want to thank you all for sticking with us. I know it's been a long webinar, but we really I appreciate the time that all of our speakers gave to really sharing a little more in depth about their projects, and hope that you found this interesting and inspiring, and hope to see an application from you all in the spring. This webinar will be recorded, or has been recorded, so we'll be posting that, and you can share with friends and colleagues as well.
Thanks, everyone.